I want you to picture this. It's 1994. Vince McMahon, the literal king of professional wrestling, is on trial and could go to prison, which would completely destroy his entire company. And at the exact same time, his TV show was an embarrassing parade of the absolute worst characters you've ever seen, from a wrestling dentist to a garbage man. This is the insane story of how the World Wrestling Federation was almost completely destroyed by a perfect storm of backstage disasters and an on-screen collapse. This is the story of the New Generation era, and it makes a powerful case for being wrestling's darkest time. You have the insane glitz of the 1980s golden era and the absolute chaos of the Attitude era. But right between them is this weird, forgotten black hole in wrestling history, a period that sits awkwardly between two of the biggest booms the industry has ever seen. The WWF called it the New Generation. It was supposed to be a massive new start, but what it actually became was a creative and financial disaster that nearly bankrupted the entire company. To understand how bad it got, you have to see where it all started. The 80s party was over. Hulk Hogan, the guy who built the entire empire, was gone. Macho Man Randy Savage was leaving. All the larger-than-life titans who had defined a generation just vanished, leaving a massive power vacuum. So what does Vince McMahon do? He pretends everything is fine. He announced a new age, built around younger, faster superstars. It was a great sales pitch, but behind the scenes, his entire kingdom was cracking under the pressure of a legal battle that was way more dangerous than any wrestling match. The storm that would define this entire era didn't start in the ring, it started in a courtroom. For years, the massive shadow of steroids had been hanging over wrestling. It was the industry's worst kept secret, fueling the insane bodies of its biggest stars. But in the early 1990s, that secret was about to become a terrifying legal nightmare. The first domino fell in 1991, when a doctor who worked for the WWF was convicted for illegally supplying steroids. The investigation didn't stop there. It led right to his clients, a list of the WWF's biggest wrestlers, and all the way to Vince McMahon's office. For 2 years, the federal government built a massive case, and in 1993, the unthinkable happened. Vince McMahon was indicted on federal charges of conspiring to distribute steroids to his wrestlers. The trial started in the summer of 1994, and it wasn't just his freedom on the line. It was the family-friendly image the WWF spent a decade building. The man who told millions of kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins was now being called a cynical drug distributor. And you will not believe who their star witness was: Hulk Hogan. But his testimony was a complete and utter disaster. On the stand, Hogan admitted he used steroids for over a decade. He tried to say it was for healing, but the damage was done. A hero to millions of kids just admitted his superhuman body was fake. For an audience that was already getting tired of the old act, this was a devastating blow. The trial revealed a horrifying picture of the industry, with wrestlers getting drug deliveries from McMahon's own secretary. In the end, Vince McMahon was acquitted. A key witness wasn't credible, and they couldn't prove he actually intended to distribute the steroids. He walked out of the courthouse a free man, but his company was wounded, maybe fatally. The trial was an absolute spectacle that shattered the company's reputation and cost millions of dollars. The media, which once loved the WWF, now saw it as a joke. The fallout was insane and immediate. To deal with the scandal, the WWF had to create an incredibly expensive drug testing policy. All of a sudden, those giant, godlike bodies of the golden era were a huge liability. The company couldn't promote the muscle-bound giants that had been its entire business model. This one event forced a massive change in direction. It sent a shockwave through the company that changed not just who could be a star, but what a star was even supposed to look like. And this desperate search for a new identity sent the WWF down a path of some of the worst creative decisions ever. With the steroid trial forcing them away from giant muscle guys, the WWF completely panicked. Vince McMahon's entire philosophy was based on larger-than-life superstars, but now the super had to be something else. His solution was a disaster. Instead of creating deep characters, he created literal cartoons. If they couldn't have bodybuilders, they would have guys with jobs. The new generation became the job title generation, a parade of some of the dumbest gimmicks you will ever see. This wasn't just a few bad ideas. This was a systemic creative failure. Fans who grew up on Hogan and Andre were now expected to care about a wrestling plumber named T.L. Hopper, who would celebrate by unclogging the ring with his plunger. I'm not joking. They gave us Duke the Dumpster Droese, a literal garbage man who carried his trash can to the ring. He was supposed to be a hero for the working class, but it was just so stupid that it felt like an insult. And it just got crazier. There was the Goon, a hockey player who was kicked out of every league for being too violent, and he would wear his skates to the ring. There was Mantar, a guy who wore a giant fuzzy bull's head and would literally charge and moo at his opponents. It was like the creative team was just throwing darts at a wall of terrible ideas, and every single one was a bullseye. But maybe the most infamous gimmick of all was Isaac Yankem, DDS. I'm not making this up. Jerry the King Lawler brought in his personal 7-foot-tall evil dentist to get revenge on Bret Hart. The character was a walking joke, and it's a miracle the man playing him, Glenn Jacobs, survived to become the Monster Kane. But at the time, it was the peak of this era's absurdity, a one-note joke that had no place in wrestling. For fans, this was the core of the problem. The show was just deeply uncool. It was insulting to watch if you were older than 10. The cartoon characters of the 80s had a charm that worked. This was different. This was cynical and desperate. It was a company that thought its entire audience was just little kids who would cheer for anyone in a colorful costume. The ultimate symbol of this creative bankruptcy came in 1996. After two of the era's biggest stars, Razor Ramon and Diesel, left for their rival WCW, the WWF didn't try to build new stars. Instead, they literally recast the characters. They hired two completely different wrestlers, gave them the same gear and music, and tried to pass them off as the real thing. This fake Diesel and fake Razor were met with complete hatred from the audience. It was a desperate, pathetic move that showed just how creatively bankrupt they were. The company wasn't just out of ideas, they were literally photocopying their old ones. This wasn't a new generation, it was a cheap copy of a generation that had already left. While the lower card was drowning in plumbers and dentists, the main event was a complete identity crisis. With Hogan gone, the WWF was obsessed with finding his replacement, the next All-American hero. Their first attempt was a spectacular failure. They took Lex Luger, a guy known for being an arrogant narcissist, and tried to turn him into a flag-waving patriot overnight. The Lex Express was born, a bus tour across the entire country where Luger would shake hands and campaign for a title shot against the evil foreigner champion, Yokozuna. The WWF threw everything they had behind him: the music, the videos, the insane promotion. It was a carbon copy of the Hulkamania plan, but the fans saw right through it. The patriotism felt fake, the hero turn felt forced, and it all just looked like a marketing gimmick. When Luger finally got his championship match at SummerSlam 1993, he won by countout, which means he didn't win the title, and then celebrated like he just won the Super Bowl. The audience was just confused. The Lex Express had run out of gas, and the company's chosen one was a total failure. With Luger's push dead, the championship was finally given to Bret the Hitman Hart, who was a huge fan favorite and maybe the best wrestler in the world. But Vince McMahon was still convinced that his top guy had to be a giant. So, after a year, the title was taken from the master technician Hart and given to his 7-foot-tall bodyguard, Diesel. Now, Kevin Nash, as Diesel, had the look. He was big, charismatic, and cool. But his year-long reign as WWF champion is now famous as one of the lowest drawing championship reigns in modern history. During his time as champ, ticket sales plummeted, and pay-per-view buys hit rock bottom. It turns out, fans didn't just want a big guy, they wanted a real champion, and Diesel's boring matches weren't it. The desperation during this period led to some insane decisions. At King of the Ring 1985, the company decided to push the super heavyweight Mabel to the moon, having him win the tournament in what's considered one of the worst performances ever. The push was a total disaster. Backstage, Mabel was known for being reckless, and during a huge match, he actually injured the company's champion, Diesel, with a botched move. It was a clear sign of the chaos. The company was pushing a guy who wasn't making any money and was also hurting their top star. It was an endless cycle of failure. They'd pick a guy, push him, watch the numbers completely collapse, and then just move on to the next failed experiment, while the company was losing millions. But here's the insane twist. Even in the absolute darkest of times, something good can happen. It would be completely unfair to say the new generation era was a total wasteland. While the main event was failing and the roster was full of cartoon characters, a quiet revolution was happening. This era, for all its problems, is what actually created the superstars who would end up saving the company. The absolute best part of these dark years was Bret the Hitman Hart. In a land of garbage men and evil dentists, Hart was a professional wrestler. He brought a realism and storytelling to his matches that was missing from everything else. His rival, Shawn Michaels, was a flashy and athletic genius. While the company was pushing failed giants, Hart and Michaels were putting on some of the best matches ever. Their 60-minute Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12 was an absolute masterpiece, a preview of the future of wrestling based on skill, not just size. This period was a time of forced change. Because the old ideas were failing so badly, the WWF had no choice but to let new ideas grow. You could see the early DNA of the Attitude Era starting to form. A trash-talking superstar named Stone Cold Steve Austin, repackaged from his boring ringmaster gimmick, delivered a promo after winning the 1996 King of the Ring that completely changed wrestling. A young, charismatic third-generation wrestler named Rocky Maivia was failing as a smiling good guy, but the audience's insane hatred of him would eventually force him to become the electrifying superstar we all know as The Rock. The desperation created innovation. The creative bankruptcy forced the company to take risks they never would have taken before. They had to get edgier. They had to push the limits. The on-screen failures and financial problems created a pressure cooker. The company had hit rock bottom, and from there, the only way to go was up. The darkness of the new generation was, in a crazy way, necessary. It had to fail, and fail completely, for Vince McMahon to finally give up the old ideas that were holding him back. The ashes of the new generation would become the fertile ground for the Attitude Era to rise from. The new generation was a complete and total disaster. The company was fighting a war on two fronts. Backstage, it was battling the United States government in a trial that could have ended everything and left its reputation destroyed. On screen, it was creatively bankrupt, putting out embarrassing gimmicks and failed champions that made business completely nosedive. This combination of backstage catastrophe and on-screen collapse created a 4-year period where the World Wrestling Federation felt lost. It was a time when the biggest wrestling company in the world felt small, goofy, and completely out of touch. But it was also a time of transition. It was the dark, necessary chapter that had to happen to set up the company's greatest comeback story ever. It was the era that nearly destroyed the WWF, but in a crazy twist, it laid the groundwork for its ultimate salvation. But that's just my breakdown. I want to know what you think. For everyone who lived through it, what was the absolute worst gimmick of the new generation era? Who did you think was going to be the next big star? Let me know in the comments right now. And if you enjoyed this insane deep dive into wrestling history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.